The second Julian posted a photo toasting 1982 Rothschild in Paris with his blonde intern. My $15 million penthouse locked me out in the freezing November rain. Access denied. Accounts frozen. He was erasing me. Then my phone rang. A cold, powerful voice spoke. "I am Magnus Sterling. Your husband is in Paris with my daughter. We need to discuss who actually owns this game." Julian made one fatal mistake. He never checked who his mistress's father was. My name is Helena Briarwood. I am 34 years old, and until exactly 45 minutes ago, I was the chief operating officer of Ethers Global. I was standing on the cobblestones of North Moore Street in Tribeca. The freezing wind of a New York November cutting through my trench coat like a razor. My suitcase, a sleek aluminum carry-on that I had packed 3 days ago for a strategic summit in Chicago that turned out to be a hallucination, sat heavy by my feet. The summit had been a fabrication. Julian had insisted I go. He said it was critical for our Series C funding. He said the investors specifically requested my technical expertise on the algorithm. But when I arrived at the conference center this morning, the venue was empty. No summit, no investors, just a confused concierge and a slow creeping dread that had followed me all the way back to LaGuardia and into the back of a yellow taxi. I looked up at the building. The cast-iron facade of our converted warehouse home usually welcomed me with the warm, amber glow of the smart lighting system I had programmed myself. Tonight, the windows were dark. I punched the code into the keypad at the private entrance. 1989, my birth year. The keys beeped, a cheerful, familiar sound. Then, the light on the panel turned a hard, unforgiving red. Access denied. I frowned, my breath hitching in my throat. I wiped the rain from the keypad and typed it again. Slower this time. 1989, access denied. System lockout initiated. I stared at the small LCD screen. I did not just live here. I designed the security protocol for this building. I wrote the handshake architecture that connected the physical locks to the central server. For the system to reject me, someone with root access had to have manually scrubbed my biometric profile from the mainframe. There was only one other person with root access, Julian. A shiver that had nothing to do with the wind rattled down my spine. I pulled out my phone to call him, but my fingers froze over the screen. A notification popped up from my banking app, then another, then a third. Alert joint checking ending in 4550. Status frozen. Alert savings ending in 2219. Status frozen. Alert Ethers corporate card. Status canceled. I stood there on the sidewalk, the cold rain soaking into my hair, and I felt the ground beneath me tilt. This was not a glitch. This was a demolition. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the corner, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I needed to get out of the cold. I needed coffee. I needed to think. I ducked into a small bodega on Greenwich Street. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing buzz. I grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them on the counter. I pulled out my graphite black Centurion card, the one Julian insisted we get to show the world we had arrived. "Chip's not reading, honey," the cashier said, popping her gum. She looked bored. "Try it again," I said, my voice sounding thin and foreign to my own ears. "Please," she sighed and jammed the card back in. "Declined. You got another one." I pulled out my personal debit card, the one from the credit union in Detroit I had kept since college. Declined. I tried Apple Pay. The phone screen flashed a red exclamation mark. Payment method invalid. "I have cash," I whispered. I dug into the bottom of my purse, bypassing the useless leather wallet, and found a crumpled $20 bill I had shoved in there weeks ago after a tipping mishap at a salon. I paid. I left. I walked back out into the rain. I could not go back to the penthouse. If Julian had changed the locks, he had likely alerted the doorman, Hector, to keep me out. I could not face the humiliation of Hector, who had known me for 5 years, telling me I was no longer welcome in my own home. I walked to the subway, I swiped the Metro card I kept in my phone case for emergencies. It worked. Thank God for small, analog miracles. I rode the train north, surrounded by tired commuters, feeling like a ghost in my own life. I got off at Times Square. I do not know why. Maybe because it was bright. Maybe because when you are invisible, you go where the lights are brightest to see if you still cast a shadow. I stood in the doorway of a souvenir shop, shielding myself from the sleet, and looked up, above the swirling chaos of tourists and Elmo impersonators. The massive curved digital billboard on the corner of 43rd Street lit up. It was an ad for Ethos Global. The screen was a brilliant, high-definition blue. "Seamless logistics," the slogan read. "The future is fluid." And there was Julian's face. He was smiling that perfect, camera-ready smile that had charmed venture capitalists out of $50 million last year. He looked confident, trustworthy. Beside him, in the ad, was a blurred graphic of a network, my code, my brain, sold with his face. I looked down at my phone. My thumb hovered over the Instagram icon. I knew I should not look. It was the digital equivalent of picking a scab until it bled. But I had to know. I opened the app. Julian's story was the first bubble in the queue. I tapped it. The video was high resolution, steady, likely shot on the new stabilizer he bought last month. It showed the interior of a Gulfstream G650. I recognized the cream leather seats and the walnut trim. We had flown this jet once, for our 5th anniversary. The camera panned from a glass of champagne bubbles rising in a golden stream to the window, showing the pitch-black sky over the Atlantic. Then, it panned to the seat across from him. Magnus Sterling was laughing. She was 21 years old, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes that always looked wide with feigned wonder. She was holding a flute of vintage wine, wearing a white cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my mother made in a year at the assembly line. She looked radiant. She looked expensive. She looked like she belonged there. The caption was typed in a bold, sans serif font. "Conquering Paris with the new leadership generation. Ethos next level." New leadership generation. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Sienna was an intern. I had hired her 3 months ago as a favor to a board member who wanted his friend's daughter to learn the ropes. She could barely format a spreadsheet. She thought Python was a type of snake, and now she was the new leadership. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email. From Ethos Human Resources Automated. Subject notice of immediate suspension and investigation. My hands trembled as I opened it. The text was boilerplate. It was the standard termination script I had helped write to protect the company from corporate espionage. "Dear Ms. Briarwood, effective immediately, your employment as Chief Operating Officer is suspended pending an investigation into severe security violations and misappropriation of proprietary data. Your access to all company systems, premises, and accounts has been revoked. This suspension is without pay." I stared at the screen. Misappropriation of data. I wrote the data. I built the architecture. I was the architect. I realized then what had happened. The security violation was the excuse to lock me out. The investigation was the legal cover to freeze my assets. Julian was not just leaving me for a younger woman. He was executing a hostile takeover of my life. He was using the very systems I created, the automated HR protocols, the smart home security, the financial firewalls to crush me. I was shivering violently now. I had $19.50 in my pocket. I had no home. I had no job. I had no access to my money. I walked. I kept walking until the neon lights of Times Square faded into the grittier, darker streets of Hell's Kitchen. I found a diner on 10th Avenue. It was one of those places that never closed, smelling of stale coffee and frying grease. I went inside. The warmth hit me, and I almost sobbed. I sat in a booth in the back, away from the window. I ordered a black coffee. It cost $2.50. I counted the bills on the Formica table. $17 left. That was my net worth. $17. I wrapped my hands around the ceramic mug, trying to steal its heat. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. My mascara was smeared. My hair was wet and matted. I looked like a refugee. I looked like the girl from Detroit I thought I had buried 15 years ago. The phone on the table lit up. It was not a number I recognized. It was a blocked ID. I stared at it. It rang 4 times. I picked it up on the 5th. Hello? My voice was a croak. Helena Briarwood. The voice was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. It sounded like the low hum of a high-voltage transformer. It was a voice that did not ask permission. "Who is this?" I asked, straightening my spine instinctively. "My name is Magnus Sterling." The name landed in the silence between us like a heavy stone. Magnus Sterling, the industrialist. The man whose steel mills built half the bridges in the Midwest, the billionaire owner of Sterling Industries. "I assume," the voice continued, smooth and cold, "that you are currently sitting in a location that is far below your usual standards, wondering why your husband is in Paris." I gripped the phone tighter. "How do you know where my husband is?" "Because he is currently posting photographs of himself drinking 1982 Rothschild on a jet that I paid for," Magnus said. "He is sitting across from my daughter, Sienna." My breath caught. Sienna Sterling, of course. The expensive clothes, the friend of a board member. She was not just a rich kid. She was the heiress to the Sterling fortune. I didn't know she was your daughter," I stammered. "That is apparent," Magnus said. "If you had known, you might have warned your husband that stealing from me is a significantly more dangerous pastime than stealing from a bank." "Stealing," I repeated. "Julian isn't—" "He's foolish, but he isn't a thief." "On the contrary," Magnus said. His tone was dry, factual, like a coroner dictating a cause of death. "My daughter has access to a venture capital trust. It is a small fund, designed to let her play at being an investor. 3 days ago, $5 million was transferred from that trust into a holding company called Parisian Ventures. Half an hour ago, that money began moving into accounts that I suspect belong to your husband." I closed my eyes. Parisian Ventures. I had seen that name on a file on Julian's desk a month ago. He told me it was a catering company for the holiday party. "He is using her," I whispered. "He is using her to wash money. He is using her because she is young, she is naive, and she is desperate for approval." Magnus said, "He thinks he has found the perfect victim, a rich girl with a daddy complex and a checkbook." "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Why don't you just call the police?" "Because the police are blunt instruments," Magnus replied. "And because my daughter's signature is on those transfer documents. If I call the authorities now, she goes down as his accomplice. I do not want my daughter in federal prison. Mrs. Briarwood, I want her to learn a lesson. But your husband, I want to destroy." I looked down at the dregs of my coffee. I looked at the $17 on the table. "He froze my accounts," I said. "He locked me out of my house. He fired me." "I know," Magnus said. "He is thorough. He has removed your pieces from the board before you even knew the game had started. But he made one miscalculation." "What's that?" "He assumed that because you are broke, you are powerless." Magnus said, "He forgot that you are the one who built the machine he is currently trying to drive. He has the car. Helena, but you have the keys." "I don't have the keys," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't have anything." "You have me," Magnus said. "I am sending a car to your location. It is a black Rolls-Royce. The driver's name is Arthur. Get in the car. Helena, we have a great deal of work to do, and very little time to do it. And if I don't—" "Then enjoy your coffee," Magnus said. "I hear the refills are free, which is fortunate, given your current liquidity." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment. I looked at the phone. I looked at the rain streaking the window. Julian was in Paris, drinking vintage wine and laughing at how easily he had erased me. He thought he was the new leadership. He thought he had won. He had no idea who he had just introduced to whom. I stood up. I left the $17 on the table as a tip. I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the diner. A long, sleek black car was already pulling up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the gloom like the eyes of a predator. I opened the door and got in. The silence inside the Rolls-Royce was absolute. It was a vacuum-sealed chamber of hand-stitched leather and walnut veneer, moving through the chaotic arteries of Manhattan like a submarine moving through dark water. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city blur into streaks of neon and gray. The luxury should have been comforting, but it only made the hollow ache in my chest expand. It smelled like new money. It smelled like Julian, but beneath the scent of conditioned leather, my memory conjured a different smell. It was the sharp, metallic tang of rust, damp concrete, and the industrial-strength hand cleaner my mother used to scrub the grease from her knuckles. Detroit. I was not born in a penthouse. I was born in a zip code where the American dream was something you saw on television, not something you lived. My father died when I was 4 years old, leaving behind a stack of unpaid medical bills and a 1998 Ford Taurus that required a prayer to start on winter mornings. My mother, Martha, worked the assembly line at a plant that manufactured axle components. She worked 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week, standing on concrete floors until her veins looked like blue ropes beneath her pale skin. She was not a warm woman. Exhaustion had burned the softness out of her long before I could remember it, but she was fierce, and she was practical. I remembered one evening in particular. I was 10 years old. The Ford Taurus had broken down again, stranding us in the slush of a grocery store parking lot. My mother popped the hood, her breath pluming in the freezing air, and stared at the engine block with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. A man, a stranger in a thick coat, had stopped to offer help. He had leaned in, smiling a little too much, and said, "Let me handle that for you. Sweetheart, you just give me the keys and sit inside where it is warm." My mother had slammed the hood shut with a sound like a gunshot. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "I fix my own problems." When we got back into the car after she had indeed fixed the loose battery terminal herself, she grabbed my chin, her fingers rough and cold. "Listen to me, Helena," she had said, her voice hard. "You can give a man your heart if you have to. You can give him your body. But never, ever let a man hold your car keys. Because the second he holds the keys, he decides where you are going, and he decides when you are walking." I had nodded, terrified and awed. I promised her I never would. I broke that promise the day I met Julian Thorne. It was our junior year at the University of Michigan. I was there on a full academic scholarship for applied mathematics, a miracle born from my obsession with order. At 16, working at a local supermarket, I had not just stocked shelves. I had reorganized the entire inventory flow based on a predictive model I scratched out in a spiral notebook. The manager had thought I was insane until his waste reduction numbers improved by 40% in 2 months. That obsession got me out of Detroit. It got me into a room full of people who had never worried about an electric bill in their lives. Julian was one of them, or at least, he pretended to be. He was sitting in the student union, holding court with 3 different people, charming them all simultaneously. He was handsome in a way that felt inevitable, with a jawline that could cut glass and a laugh that made you feel like you were the funniest person in the room. He was a business major. He barely passed his statistics classes. He did not understand the numbers, but he understood the people who signed the checks. I was the girl in the oversized hoodie in the corner, debugging code for a logistics project. He walked over, picked up my notebook, and whistled. "I have no idea what this is," he had said, flashing that 1,000-watt smile. "But it looks like money." He was the interface I lacked. I was the raw processing power. He was the sleek, user-friendly design. I could build the engine, but Julian could sell the car. We became a team. Then we became lovers. He told me I was brilliant. He told me I was beautiful, even in my thrift store jeans. He made me feel seen, not just as a machine that spit out optimization algorithms, but as a woman. Aetheris Global started in our first apartment in Chicago. It was a drafty, one-bedroom walk-up that smelled of boiled cabbage and old carpet. I spent 18 hours a day hunched over two monitors set up on a folding card table, writing the core code. I built the black box, the dynamic routing algorithm that would eventually revolutionize shipping logistics for half the Fortune 500. While I coded, Julian was out. He was at mixers, at coffee shops, crashing conferences he had not paid to attend. He came home late, smelling of cheap wine and expensive ambition, buzzing with energy. They loved it. "Helena," he would say, pacing the small room. I told them about the vision, the seamless future. They are ready to buy. "Did you tell them about the latency issue I fixed?" I would ask, rubbing my tired eyes. "I told them it works like magic," he would reply, kissing the top of my head. "You are the wizard. I am just the messenger." It felt like a partnership. We were us against the world, two hungry kids trying to eat the city alive. But as the money started to come in, the dynamic shifted. It was subtle at first, like the slow erosion of a shoreline. The first seed round brought us $5 million. We moved to New York. We got an office in Soho. We hired staff. And suddenly, Julian was the CEO. It made sense. We agreed. He was the face. I was the COO. I was the technical genius. I did not want the spotlight. I hated public speaking. I hated the cameras. But then the interviews started. I remember reading a profile in Forbes titled, "The Boy Wonder of Logistics." The journalist asked Julian about the challenges of building the initial algorithm. "It was many long nights," Julian had said in the article. "I had to really dig deep to visualize how the data should flow. I wanted to create something organic." I had thrown the magazine onto the marble kitchen island. I had asked him. "You visualized the data flow, Julian. You thought bandwidth was a type of music group until I corrected you." He had laughed, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Honey, it is just a narrative. People need a hero, a singular visionary. It confuses the market if there are two cooks in the kitchen. Besides," he had walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist, "everyone inside the building knows who the real genius is. You are my rock. You are the secret weapon." The secret weapon, that was what he called me. Not his partner, not his co-founder. His weapon, a tool to be kept in the holster until he needed to fire. I let it slide. I let it slide because we were married now. I let it slide because the penthouse was beautiful, and the life was comfortable, and I told myself that his ego was the shield that protected me from the world I found so exhausting. Then my mother died. It was 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast and brutal. I spent the last week by her bedside in the hospice in Detroit, watching the strongest woman I ever knew wither into a skeleton. Julian stayed in New York. He said he had to close the deal with a major German shipping conglomerate. "I will be there for the funeral, baby," he had promised on the phone. "I swear, I will catch the red eye." The day of the funeral. The sky was a flat, bruised purple. It was snowing. That wet and heavy Detroit snow that soaks through your boots in seconds. I stood by the open grave, surrounded by a handful of my mother's old co-workers from the plant. They looked at me with a mix of pity and suspicion, the girl who got out, standing in her $2,000 coat. I checked my phone every 30 seconds, 10 minutes before the service began. A text message appeared. "Flight grounded due to weather in Frankfurt. Stuck in meetings. This deal is the big one. We are talking 9 figures. I know you understand. Love you. Be strong." He was not stuck in Frankfurt. I checked the weather. It was clear. And later, I saw the credit card bill. He had been at a steakhouse in Manhattan, racking up a $4,000 tab with the German executives. I stood there as they lowered my mother into the frozen ground. I was completely alone. I realized then that I was not his partner. I was not his wife. I was an asset. I was a function of his success. Convenient when I was making him money. Invisible when I needed him to be a human being. My mother's voice echoed in my head as the dirt hit the casket. Never let a man hold your keys. I had not just given him the keys to the car, I had given him the title to the car, the map, and the gasoline. I had built the engine, polished the chrome, and then climbed into the trunk. Grateful that he was willing to drive. Sitting in the back of Magnus Sterling's Rolls-Royce, the memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I looked down at my hands. They were manicured now, soft, no longer stained with the cheap ink of supermarket receipts, but they were empty. I had betrayed her. I had betrayed the woman who scrubbed grease off her skin so I could learn calculus. I had let a man with a shiny smile and a hollow soul take everything she had sacrificed for. The anger did not come all at once. It started as a cold, hard knot in my stomach, right next to the shame. Julian thought he had locked me out. He thought that by taking the money and the access, he had taken my power. He thought I was just the supportive wife he had painted me as in the magazines. He forgot where I came from. He forgot that before I was Helena Briarwood, the COO of Ethirus Global, I was Helena from Detroit. I knew how to fix a broken engine in the freezing cold. I knew how to survive on instant coffee and rage. And most importantly, I knew how to take a system apart and find the flaw. The car slowed down, turning onto a private ramp that led underground. "We have arrived, Ms. Briarwood," the driver said. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence in my mind. I looked up. My reflection in the rearview mirror stared back. The fear was gone. The shock was gone. In their place was something cold, sharp, and mathematical. I was done being the passenger. It was time to take the wheel back, even if I had to crash the car to do it. 3 months ago. Sienna Sterling walked into the glass-walled lobby of Ethirus Global like a sunbeam piercing through a storm cloud. She was 21, radiating the kind of effortless confidence that only comes from generational wealth. She wore a vintage Chanel blazer over a simple white tee, and she carried a battered leather satchel that she probably thought made her look bohemian, though it retailed for $3,000. She told everyone she was just Sienna, omitting the last name that was stamped on steel beams across the continent. She said she wanted to learn the business from the ground up. She said she wanted to be self-made. Julian introduced her to me in my office. He had his hand on the small of her back, a gesture he claimed was paternal but which, in hindsight, was entirely possessive. "Helena, this is our new special projects intern," he had said, beaming. "She is sharp. I want you to mentor her. Show her how the engine runs." "I don't have time for interns, Julian," I had replied, not looking up from my dual monitors. "We are in the middle of the Q4 scalability patch." "Make time," he said, his voice dropping a register. "Her family is influential. It is good for optics." So, I made time. I sat Sienna down and tried to explain the complexities of predictive logistics. I showed her the data architecture. She nodded enthusiastically, her wide blue eyes fixed on the screen. But I could tell she wasn't seeing the code. She was seeing the magic, to her. Ethirus wasn't a complex system of mathematical proofs. It was a cool tech company that made things move fast. "You are so smart, Helena," she would say, her voice breathy with admiration. "Like, scary smart. Julian says you are the brain, but he is the heart." I should have seen the setup then. Julian was already scripting the narrative. Over the next few weeks, the mentorship became a farce. Julian would constantly pull Sienna out of my sessions. "Boring technical stuff," he would say, winking at her. "Come sit in on the strategy meeting. You need to see the big picture." The big picture, apparently, involved a lot of laughing behind the soundproof glass of the main conference room. I would be at my desk, troubleshooting a critical server load issue, sweating through my blouse, while 50 feet away, Julian and Sienna were drinking espresso and sketching on a whiteboard. They looked like a stock photo of a startup, the visionary leader and his eager protege. I was the IT support in the background. Then the gaslighting began. It started with small comments in front of the staff. "Helena is a bit of a perfectionist," Julian would say during the all-hands meeting, chuckling as if it were an endearing quirk. She gets so bogged down in the details, she forgets we are running a business, not a math class. Then it escalated. He started canceling my meetings. I thought you were overwhelmed, he told me when I confronted him. You have looked so tired lately. Babe, I didn't want to stress you out. Sienna can handle the vendor check-in. Sienna? I snapped. Sienna thinks net 30 is a tennis score. She can't handle a vendor negotiation. Julian looked at me with deep, practiced concern. He reached out to touch my forehead. See, this is what I mean. You are so high-strung. You are snapping at a kid who just wants to help. Maybe you need a break. Have you been taking your anxiety meds? I didn't take anxiety meds, but by the 3rd month, I started to wonder if I should. He made me feel crazy. He made me feel like the angry, aging obstacle to his youthful, vibrant vision. Sienna was the perfect foil. She was not the villain in a soap opera. She was not cruel. She was worse, she was dangerously naive. She worshipped Julian. To her, he was a tortured genius, carrying the weight of the world, held back by a wife who didn't understand his spirit. I walked into the break room once and heard her talking to another intern. It is so sad, she was saying. Her voice hushed. Julian tries so hard to include her, but she is just so negative. She shuts down all his big ideas. He told me he feels suffocated at home. He says she is emotionally abusive. I stood frozen by the coffee machine, my hand gripping the handle until my knuckles turned white. Emotionally abusive, I was the one who balanced the books at midnight while he slept. I was the one who fixed his messes. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday because he never could. But the real betrayal was not emotional. It was architectural. 2 weeks ago, I noticed a discrepancy in the code repository. A small packet of data had been copied from the core algorithm, the black box, and moved to an external server. When I traced the IP address, it led to a secure cloud account registered to Parisian Ventures LLC. I dug deeper. I am a creature of patterns. And this pattern was screaming at me. Parisian Ventures was not a catering company. It was a shell entity registered in Delaware, with a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. The signatory on the incorporation documents was not Julian, it was Sienna Sterling. I sat back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor illuminating the dark office. Julian was smart. I had to give him that. He knew he could not put his name on a competitor company while still CEO of Ethirus. It would be a breach of fiduciary duty. He would be sued into oblivion. So he found a proxy. A proxy with a perfect pedigree and zero business acumen. He had convinced Sienna that Parisian Ventures was a secret project, a skunkworks division where they could innovate without the board and specifically. Without me stifling their creativity, he likely told her it was a surprise. We are going to build the future, Sienna, just you and me, but we have to keep it quiet until it is ready. And she, starry-eyed and desperate to be part of something real, had signed her name. She had opened the bank accounts. She had authorized the transfers. She thought she was a co-founder. In reality, she was a mule. The trip to Paris suddenly made terrifying sense. It was not just a romantic getaway. France has strict corporate privacy laws, but physical presence is often required for certain high-level banking transfers involving Swiss and Luxembourg intermediaries. Julian needed her there. He needed her body in the room to sign the final documents that would transfer the intellectual property rights of my algorithm from Ethirus Global to Parisian Ventures. He was stealing the company. He was stealing my life's work. And he was setting up his 21-year-old mistress to take the fall if anyone ever found out. If the SEC investigated, Julian would throw up his hands. I had no idea, he would say. This intern, she was obsessed with me. She stole the data. She opened the accounts. Look, her name is on everything. I am just a victim of a stalker. It was monstrous. It was brilliant. I stood up from my desk that night, trembling with a rage so pure it felt like clarity. I watched them through the glass wall of the conference room one last time. Julian was showing her something on his laptop, pointing at the screen. Sienna was nodding, biting her lip in concentration, holding a pen she didn't know how to use. He wasn't just taking my husband. He wasn't just taking my job. He was weaponizing a child to assassinate me. I walked out of the office without saying a word. I went home and started backing up my personal servers, but I was too slow. The next morning, he sent me to the fake summit, and by the time I got back, the locks were changed. Now, sitting in the back of Magnus Sterling's car, the pieces fell into place with a sickening click. Sienna wasn't the enemy. She was the bomb Julian had built, and he was currently holding the detonator in a 5-star hotel room in Paris. "He is going to destroy her," I whispered to the empty air of the Rolls-Royce. "He is going to let her go to prison for him." Magnus Sterling didn't answer. He didn't have to. The car sped up, rushing toward the safe house, toward the war room, where we would have to defuse the bomb before it blew us all to hell. The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was quiet enough to hear the leather breathe. The air was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and aged scotch. Sitting on the rear bench seat, illuminated by the soft glow of a reading light, was a man who looked less like a father and more like a monument carved from granite. Magnus Sterling did not turn his head when I slid onto the seat beside him. He was studying a thick manila folder, his fingers turning the pages with a rhythmic, predatory precision. He was older than he looked in the business journals. The lines around his eyes were deep trenches of stress and calculation, and his silver hair was cut with military severity. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the down payment on my first apartment. "Close the door," he said. He did not look up. I pulled the heavy door shut. The city noise, the sirens, the rain, the honking taxis vanished instantly, replaced by the hum of the climate control. "You are wet," Magnus noted. Finally closing the file, he turned to look at me. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, devoid of any warmth. They were assessing me, measuring my value in real time. "It is raining," I replied, matching his flatness. "And my husband locked me out of my house." "Your husband," Magnus corrected, "is currently attempting to dismantle my legacy. The state of your wardrobe is collateral damage." He slid the folder across the leather seat toward me. "Read it." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then opened the file. It was a forensic dossier. It was terrifyingly detailed. It had timestamps of Julian's movements for the past 6 months. It had transcripts of encrypted messages. It had photos of him meeting with men I did not recognize, men who looked like they broke fingers for a living. But the document on the 3rd page stopped my heart. It was a loan guarantee, a massive line of credit secured from a private equity firm in Zurich. The collateral listed was not Aetheris Global. It was a block of preferred stock in Sterling Industries, and at the bottom, right next to Julian's flamboyant signature, was a seal, an old-fashioned, red wax seal stamped with a crest I recognized from the financial news, the Sterling family crest. "He didn't just use Sienna's trust fund," I whispered, my finger hovering over the image. "He used your personal seal." "Sienna stole it from my study 3 weeks ago," Magnus said. His voice was low, a rumble of suppressed fury. "She thought she was helping. Julian told her it was a symbolic gesture, a way to show the investors that the family was behind the project. She did not understand that by stamping that document, she effectively made me the guarantor of a $50 million loan to a shell company that does not technically exist." I looked up at him. If this loan defaults, Magnus interrupted. "The creditors come after my personal holding company, but that is not the problem. I can lose $50 million and sleep soundly. The problem is that Julian is moving that money into accounts linked to sanctioned entities. If that seal is connected to money laundering, I do not just lose money, I lose my security clearance. I lose my government contracts. I go to prison for treason." He took a sip from a crystal tumbler resting in the center console. "My daughter thinks this is a romantic adventure. She thinks she is Romeo and Juliet against the world. She has no idea she is holding a grenade with the pin pulled." "So stop the transaction," I said. "You are Magnus Sterling. Call the bank. Tell them it was theft. And send my own daughter to jail for fraud and grand larceny." Magnus looked at me with a withering expression. If I report the theft, Sienna is arrested. She signed the papers. Helena, she stole the seal physically. There is video footage of her entering my office. If I claim fraud, I have to burn her to save myself. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. I do not burn my family, but I will burn the man who put the match in her hand. So what do you want from me? I asked. You have the dossier. You know what he is doing. I have the what, Magnus said. I do not have the how. I have a team of the best forensic accountants in New York waiting at a secure location. They have been trying to breach the Aetherus servers for 6 hours to freeze the assets before Julian can transfer the funds to the offshore accounts. They have failed. I felt a small, cold smile touch my lips. Of course they failed. Magnus narrowed his eyes. Why? Because I built the wall, I said. And I do not use standard encryption. The Aetherus architecture is a polymorphic system. It changes its own keys every 12 minutes based on a variable that only I know. Your hackers are trying to pick a lock that changes shape every time they touch it. Then give me the variable, Magnus demanded. I looked at him. I looked at the powerful man who thought he could order me around just because he had bought me a ride out of the rain. No, I said. The air in the car seemed to drop 10 degrees. Magnus did not blink. Excuse me. You think this is just a transaction, I said, my voice steady. You think you can use me to save your daughter and your reputation, and then toss me aside like Julian did. You think I am just a witness, a victim. I closed the dossier and placed my hand on top of it. I am not a victim. Mr. Sterling, I am the architect. That system is my child. Julian stole it. He stole my life. He stole my reputation. If you want into that system, you do not get the variable. You get me. I can pay you, Magnus said dismissively. Name your price. 1 million, 2 million. I don't want your money, I snapped. I want to be the one who pushes the button. I want to be the one who watches his face when the screen goes black. I want to see him realize that the wife he erased is the one who just deleted him. Magnus stared at me for a long, heavy minute. He was searching for something in my face. Fear, greed, weakness. He found none of it. Slowly, the tension in his shoulders relaxed. He let out a short, dry laugh. It was a terrifying sound. You are nothing like her, he said softly. Like who? Sienna, Magnus said. He looked out the window at the rain-slicked streets. Sienna is soft. She has lived her life on a cushion I provided. She thinks love is a fairy tale. She thinks business is a game. She breaks easily. He turned back to me, and for the first time, there was something like respect in those cold blue eyes. I have 500 lawyers. Helena, I have lobbyists in Washington. I have security teams that can destabilize a small country, but I lack a general. I lack someone who understands that this is not a lawsuit. It is a war. He tapped the folder beneath my hand. You have fire in your eyes, not the weeping fire of a heartbroken wife, the cold fire of an executioner. That is what I need. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, black key card. He held it out to me. We are going to a safe house in the meatpacking district. It is off the grid. It has a dedicated fiber line and a Cray supercomputer cluster in the basement. My team is there. From this moment on, they answer to you. I took the card. It felt heavy and cool in my hand. And Julian. By the time we are done, Magnus said, Julian will wish he had never learned to spell the name Sterling. The car turned down a cobblestone street lined with old industrial warehouses. This was the meatpacking district, but not the trendy part with the high-end boutiques and rooftop bars. This was the edge, where the buildings still looked like fortresses. The Rolls-Royce pulled into a freight elevator that opened directly onto the street. The heavy steel doors clamored shut behind us, and the car began to rise. When the doors opened again, we were in a loft that looked less like an apartment and more like the bridge of a spaceship. The walls were exposed brick, but the center of the room was dominated by a circular bank of monitors suspended from the ceiling. Cables ran across the floor in thick, organized bundles. 3 people, 2 men and a woman, sat at the terminals, typing furiously. They wore headsets and drank energy drinks. They looked exhausted. Magnus stepped out of the car. "Attention!" he barked. The typing stopped. The 3 hackers spun their chairs around. They looked at Magnus with fear, and then at me with confusion. "This is Ms. Briarwood," Magnus announced. "She is taking command of the digital offensive. Whatever she asks for, you give it to her. If she asks for a coffee, you brew it. If she asks for the nuclear launch codes, you start dialing the Pentagon. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," they chorused. I walked toward the main terminal. The lead hacker, a young man with a sleeve of tattoos, stood up to give me his seat. On the main screen, a red progress bar was stuck at 0%. The words, "Access denied," flashed in a mocking loop. "We tried a brute force attack on the firewall," the hacker explained, his voice nervous. "We tried SQL injection. We even tried to spoof the admin credentials. The system is airtight. It detects every intrusion attempt and rewrites the login protocol." "I know," I said, sitting down. The chair was ergonomic mesh, expensive and stiff. "I programmed it to do that to stop people like you." I placed my hands on the keyboard. It was a mechanical keyboard. The keys heavy and satisfying. For the first time in 12 hours, my hands stopped shaking. "So, how do we get in?" Magnus asked, standing behind me. "Do you have a password?" "There is no password," I said, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Julian revoked my credentials. He deleted my admin account. If I try to log in as Helena Briarwood, the system will lock down permanently and wipe the drives." "Then we are stuck," Magnus said. "No," I replied. "We are not stuck, because Julian made a mistake. He thought I was just an employee. He forgot that I am the creator." I closed my eyes for a second, visualizing the architecture of the code. I saw it not as lines of text, but as a vast, intricate cathedral. I knew every beam, every archway, every hidden passage. "When I built the core kernel 5 years ago," I said, my voice low, "I was paranoid. I was worried that one day a hostile board might try to push us out, or that a government agency might try to seize our data. So I built a back door. I began to type. I did not type a login. I opened the command line interface. I did not label it back door," I continued, the clack, clack, clack of the keys filling the room. "I hid it inside the system maintenance protocol. It is disguised as a glitch, a memory leak in the cooling fan driver." The hackers behind me gasped. "The cooling fan driver," one of them whispered. "That is hardware level. No one checks that." "Exactly," I said. I typed in a string of code that looked like nonsense. It was a series of prime numbers derived from the dates of my mother's chemotherapy sessions. It was the only sequence of numbers Julian would never know, because he had never bothered to ask. Enter. The screen flickered. The red "Access Denied" banner vanished. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Magnus took a sharp breath. Then, a single line of green text appeared. "System maintenance mode engaged. Welcome, architect." "I am in," I said. I navigated quickly past the outer defenses. I bypassed the HR logs. I went straight to the financial core. The dashboard lit up, a complex web of transactions flowing like a river of light. "My God," the tattooed hacker breathed. "Look at the volume." I pulled up the active transfers. There it was. A massive pipeline of capital moving from the account labeled Sterling Trust, Siena, into a holding tank called Parisian Ventures, and from there, it was being broken up into thousands of smaller microtransactions, ready to be scattered into the dark web. "He is moving it fast," I said, my eyes scanning the data. "He is using an automated laundering script. In 2 hours, that money will be untraceable." "Can you stop it?" Magnus asked. His hand gripped the back of my chair. "I can do better than stop it," I said. The cold rage that had been fueling me since the diner sharpened into a diamond point. "I can redirect it." I opened a new window. I accessed the administrative privileges. I found Julian's user profile. It was currently active. His geolocation tag showed Hotel Plaza Athénée, Paris. He is online right now, I said. He is watching the money move. He is probably toasting to his own genius. Freeze the accounts, Magnus ordered. Not yet, I said. If I freeze it now, he knows we are on to him. He pulls the plug, destroys the hard drives in Paris, and claims he was hacked. We lose the evidence. I turned to look at Magnus. You wanted a war. Mr. Sterling, in a war, you do not just shoot the enemy, you let him walk into the trap. I turned back to the screen. I am going to let the transfer continue, but I'm going to tag every single dollar with a digital isotope, a tracker. I am going to let him steal the money, and I am going to let him deposit it into his hidden accounts, and when he feels safe. When he thinks the money is clean. Then what? Magnus asked. Then I execute the boomerang protocol, I said. I recall the funds, but not to the trust. I recall them to a holding account controlled by the DOJ, and I attach his digital signature to every single cent. Magnus was silent. I could feel him smiling behind me. Do it, he said. I typed the command. Execute. The screen flashed green. The trap was set. Now, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I need a shower. I need a change of clothes. And then, Mr. Sterling, I need you to fuel up that jet, because if we want to catch him when the trap snaps shut, we need to be in Paris. Magnus nodded to the driver. Arthur, take Ms. Briarwood to the guest suite. Get her whatever she needs. And get the flight crew on standby. He looked at me one last time before I walked away. You were right, Helena, he said quietly. You are not a victim. You are terrifying. I learned from the best, I replied, thinking of Julian's betrayal and my mother's warnings. I just finally decided to apply the lesson. For 48 hours, I did not sleep, I did not eat. I existed solely as a biological extension of the keyboard. The air in the safe house had grown stale, recycled through the industrial ventilation system, heavy with the smell of ozone and cold coffee. The 3 hackers Magnus had assigned to me had long since crashed, slumped over in their ergonomic chairs or curled up on the leather sofa in the corner. But I could not stop. To stop was to think. To think was to remember the look on Julian's face in that Instagram video, the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. So I did not think. I hunted. I was deep inside the subdirectory of the Aetherus server, a dark, unindexed corner of the digital architecture that Julian had tried to wipe. He had used a standard deletion protocol, the kind that removes the file name from the directory but leaves the data imprint on the disk until it is overwritten. It was lazy. It was sloppy. It was exactly the kind of mistake a salesman makes when he thinks he is an engineer. I recovered the fragmented data block by block, stitching the ghost files back together like a digital Frankenstein. At 4 a.m. on the second day, the final piece snapped into place. I hit execute. A folder opened on my screen titled, Simply Project Matryoshka. I opened the first document. It was a contract. My eyes scanned the legal boilerplate, moving faster and faster as the realization hit me. This was not just embezzlement. This was not just stealing $5 million from a rich girl's trust fund to buy a villa in the south of France. This was treason. Julian was not just selling the company. He was selling the source code. He was selling the Aetherus AI, the proprietary logic capable of optimizing military supply lines and national power grids, to a holding company called Volkov Heavy Industries. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in logistics knew that name. Volkov was a state-sponsored Russian conglomerate. They were currently number 4 on the United States Treasury Department's sanctions list. Doing business with them was a federal crime. Selling them dual-use technology like the Aetherus A, I was a guaranteed one-way ticket to a federal supermax prison for 20 years. He is selling the brain, I whispered to the empty room. He is selling the brain to the enemy. I pulled up the communication logs. Julian had been negotiating this for 6 months. The emails were coded. using vague business speak. But the intent was clear. Volkov wanted the latency reduction protocols. That was the code I wrote to help emergency responders navigate disaster zones. In the hands of Volkov, it could be used to guide drone swarms or bypass missile defense radars. My stomach churned. I felt physically ill. Julian was greedy. Yes, he was vain. But I never thought he was a traitor. I never thought he would sell out his country for a payout. I needed to know where the handover was happening. The contract mentioned a physical exchange of the encryption keys. The digital transfer was too risky. The NSA monitored the fiber lines. They were doing it the old-fashioned way, a hard drive, a handshake. I opened a new window and pulled up the social media feed of Magnus Sterling. The poor, stupid girl. She was his alibi. She was his camouflage. Sienna had posted a story 3 hours ago. She was standing in front of a heavy, ornate wooden door on a quiet street in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. She was holding a bag of macarons, looking over her shoulder with a coy smile. The caption read, "Julian is in a boring meeting, so I'm exploring hidden gems of Paris." I ran the image through a geolocation algorithm. The geotag said Paris, but I needed the exact address. The algorithm identified the unique ironwork on the door behind her. It was the entrance to a private club called Le Cercle Rouge. I cross-referenced the location with the intelligence dossier Magnus had given me. Le Cercle Rouge was a known meeting point for Eastern European oligarchs. It was a place where business was done in the shadows, away from the prying eyes of regulators. Julian was in that club. He was meeting the Volkov representatives, and he had left Sienna standing outside to take selfies, establishing his presence in the area as a tourist while he committed espionage inside. But there was more. I went back to the recovered data. There was a subfolder labeled Insurance. I opened it, and for the first time in 48 hours, my hands went cold. It was a collection of emails, dozens of them. They were sent from my Ethereus corporate account. They were addressed to Julian. "Julian, stop worrying about the legality. The Volkov deal is the only way to save the company. Julian, I don't care about the sanctions. Just sign the papers. I will handle the technical transfer. Julian, if you don't do this, we are bankrupt. Trust me. I am the COO. I am making the executive decision." They were fake. They were spoofed. He had used a keylogger to steal my password months ago and had been planting these emails in the server archives. He was building a narrative, in his version of the story. I was the mastermind. I was the desperate, unethical genius pushing her reluctant, innocent husband into a deal with the Russians. He was just the bumbling CEO who did what his brilliant wife told him to do. If the FBI raided us tomorrow, these emails would be the first thing they found. I would go to prison for the rest of my life. Julian would get a plea deal for cooperating. He would claim he was manipulated by his controlling, superior wife. The rage that filled me then was not hot. It was absolute zero. It was the temperature of deep space. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but I did not feel the fatigue anymore. I walked over to the coffee machine, poured a black cup, and drank it in one long swallow. Then I walked to the heavy steel door of the server room and pushed it open. Magnus Sterling was sitting in the living area of the loft, reviewing documents with a team of 3 lawyers. He looked up as I entered. He saw the look on my face. He stopped talking mid-sentence. He stood up and walked over to me. "What did you find?" "It is not just fraud," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "Julian is selling the Ethereus AI source code to Volkov Heavy Industries. He is violating the international traffic and arms regulations. He is committing treason." "Magnus." The room went silent. The lawyers looked at each other, their faces pale. "Volkov," Magnus repeated. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. "He is selling American tech to a sanctioned Russian entity." "Yes," I said, "and he has framed me for it. He has planted a year's worth of fake correspondence showing that I orchestrated the deal and forced him to sign. He is going to sell the code, take the $50 million from the Russians, and then tip off the FBI that his wife has gone rogue." Magnus closed his eyes for a brief moment. I saw the muscles in his jaw work. And Sienna. Sienna is his human shield, I said. She is currently posting photos outside the meeting spot in Paris. If the French authorities or the CIA swoop in, she is right there. She signed the incorporation papers for the shell company receiving the funds. She looks like the bagman. He will let her rot, Magnus said softly. He will let my daughter go to a black site prison to save his own skin. Yes, I said. He will. I walked over to the main display screen on the wall and plugged in my laptop. The map of Paris appeared, with a blinking red dot on the 8th arrondissement. He thinks he is playing three-dimensional chess, I said. He thinks I am back in New York, crying over my frozen bank accounts. He thinks you are running around trying to save your reputation. He thinks he is invisible. I turned to Magnus. He is wrong. Magnus looked at the map. Then he looked at me. For the last 2 days, he had looked at me with curiosity, perhaps a bit of wariness. Now, that look was gone. In its place was something profound. It was recognition. He was looking at me the way a king looks at the knight who just saved the kingdom. What is the play? He asked. He did not ask his lawyers. He asked me. We do not call the FBI, I said. Not yet. If we call them now, Julian might get spooked and dump the drive. Or worse, he might claim diplomatic immunity through some back channel. We need to catch him with his hand in the jar. We need to catch him holding the drive, with the money in the account, and the Russians in the room. We need to be in that room, Magnus said. No, I corrected. We need to be the ones who walk in right after the deal is done. We need him to feel safe. We need him to think he has won, and then we need to burn him down. Magnus nodded slowly. The G650 is fueled and waiting at Teterboro. We can be wheels up in an hour. He walked over to where I stood. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy, grounding. You have not slept in 2 days, he said. You look like a ghost. I feel fine, I lied. You feel like vengeance, Magnus said. It is a powerful drug, but you need to eat. You need to shower. We have a 7-hour flight. He paused, his eyes searching mine. You know, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that the lawyers couldn't hear. I have spent 30 years building an empire. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. My sons just want to spend the money. My daughter just wants to be loved. I have searched for a successor, someone who understands that the world is not fair, that it is built by those who have the will to build it. He squeezed my shoulder. I never thought I would find that person in the woman my daughter's lover was trying to destroy. I am just doing my job. Mr. Sterling, I said. I am the COO. I fix operational inefficiencies. Julian is a very large inefficiency. Magnus smiled. It was a real smile this time, a wolfish grin. Stop calling me Mr. Sterling, he said. It makes me feel like I am at a board meeting. What should I call you? My inner circle calls me Magnus, he said. But given that we are about to go to war together to save my family and your life, he paused, and the air in the room seemed to shift. You can call me father, not because of biology, but because you are the only one in this room who has earned the right to sit at the head of my table. The word hung there. Father. It wasn't sentimental. It was a title. It was a knighthood. Thank you, Magnus, I said. I wasn't ready for father yet, but I understood the offer. Get your things, daughter, he said, turning back to his lawyers, his voice booming with renewed authority. We are going to Paris, and I want the French legal team ready to file an injunction the moment our wheels touch the tarmac. I unplugged my laptop. I closed the lid. I looked at the black screen. Seeing my reflection, the tired, scared woman from the diner was gone. In her place was a weapon. I picked up my bag. Let's go to Paris, I said. I have a husband to dismantle. The bathroom of Magnus Sterling's Gulfstream G650 was larger than the first apartment I shared with Julian. It was lined with backlit onyx and polished chrome, a shrine to high-altitude vanity. I stood in front of the mirror, gripping the porcelain edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white. The vibration of the engines was a low, constant hum in the soles of my feet, a reminder that we were hurtling across the Atlantic at Mach 0.9. Behind me, a woman named Elise stood waiting. She was not a flight attendant. She was a stylist Magnus had summoned to the airfield in Teterboro just before we took off. She held a pair of Japanese steel shears in her hand, her expression professional and impassive. "Are you sure, madame?" she asked softly. I looked at my reflection. I saw the long chestnut waves that fell past my shoulders. Julian had always loved my hair long. He said it made me look softer. He said it balanced out my intense energy. He liked to wind it around his fist when he kissed me, a gesture that used to feel passionate but now, in the harsh light of memory, felt like a leash. "I am not the woman who boarded this plane," I said, my voice steady. "Cut it off." Elise stepped forward. The sound of the scissors was a sharp, rhythmic snip, snip, snip. Dark locks fell onto the white marble floor like dead leaves. I watched the transformation without blinking. I was shedding the skin of the wife. I was shedding the softness that Julian had exploited. When Elise was finished, the woman in the mirror was a stranger. My hair was now a sharp, angled bob that grazed my jawline. It was severe. It was aerodynamic. It exposed the lines of my neck and the set of my jaw. I looked like someone you did not want to negotiate with. I walked back into the main cabin. Magnus was sitting in his leather captain's chair, reviewing a dossier on a tablet. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes widened. He nodded, a slow, appreciative gesture. "Better," he said. "Efficiency suits you." On the seat opposite him lay a garment bag. "The clothes you requested," he said. "My team in Milan pulled some strings. No lace, no silk, just structure." I took the bag to the changing room. I put on the suit. It was a charcoal gray, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. The fabric was a heavy wool blend that felt like armor. The pants were cigarette cut, the jacket structured with sharp shoulders. I put on a pair of black stilettos that were not designed for walking. They were designed for piercing. When the plane began its descent into Le Bourget Airport, the city of Paris sprawled out below us, a grid of golden lights fighting back the gray dawn. Julian had brought me here once, 5 years ago. We had walked along the Seine, eating crepes, and he had promised me the world. Now, looking at the Eiffel Tower stabbing the sky. The city didn't look romantic. It looked like a battlefield. We did not go to a hotel. We went to a private residence on Place Vendôme, directly across the square from the Ritz Paris. It was an apartment Magnus kept for sensitive negotiations. The living room had a direct line of sight to the front entrance of the Ritz. While Magnus's security team set up the encrypted servers on a Louis XIV dining table, I stood by the window with a pair of high-powered binoculars. "They are in the Imperial Suite," Magnus said, coming to stand beside me. "First floor, balcony facing the garden, but the entrance is visible from here." "I know," I said. "I can see the receipt on the American Express alert system I hacked into before we landed." He ordered beluga caviar and a bottle of Dom Perignon at 3 a.m. I adjusted the focus on the binoculars. The heavy revolving doors of the Ritz spun, and a couple walked out. My breath hitched. It was them. Julian looked impeccable in a navy overcoat, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked relaxed, the picture of a man without a care in the world. Clinging to his arm was Sienna. She was wearing a white beret and a coat that looked like it was made of chinchilla fur. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking up at him with that wide-eyed adoration that made my stomach turn. She raised her hand to adjust her scarf, and the light caught it, a diamond ring. It was massive, an emerald-cut solitaire that had to be at least 4 carats. I lowered the binoculars and picked up my tablet. I opened Instagram. There it was. Posted 10 minutes ago. A close-up of her hand resting on Julian's chest, the ring blazing in the center of the frame. The caption read, "Forever starts in Paris. Soulmates future Mrs. Thorne." "He proposed," I said. My voice flat. He bought a 4-carat diamond with money he stole from her own father, and he proposed to her. Magnus looked at the screen over my shoulder. His face was a mask of stone, but the veins in his temple were throbbing. He is sealing the deal, Magnus said. He needs her to feel completely committed before the handover tonight. If she thinks she is his fiancée, she will sign anything he puts in front of her. She thinks it is a fairy tale, I said. She has no idea she is the sacrifice. I sat down at the computer terminal. I need to get into her phone. The geolocation tag confirms she is on the local network. Is it protected? Magnus asked. It is Sienna, I said. Her password is probably her dog's name. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass the weak security of the hotel Wi-Fi and bridge into her device. I wasn't proud of it. Hacking a 21-year-old girl felt like kicking a puppy. But I needed to know what Julian was feeding her. I pulled up her text messages. There was a thread with a contact named BFF Chloe. Chloe OMG. The ring is insane. But wait, isn't he still married, Sienna? Not for long. Julian says it is basically over. He is just waiting for the papers. Chloe, is the wife going to be crazy, Sienna? Julian says she is totally unstable. He said she has been having a breakdown for months. She is super controlling and jealous. He thinks she might even go to prison for some financial stuff she messed up at the company. He is trying to protect me from her drama. We just want to be free. I stared at the words. Unstable. Breakdown. Prison. He wasn't just leaving me. He was proactively destroying my character to everyone who would listen. He was painting a picture of a mentally ill, incompetent criminal so that when the FBI came knocking, everyone would nod and say, "Yes, we saw the signs." "Does it hurt?" Magnus asked quietly. I looked at the text again. "No," I said, and I was surprised to find it was the truth. It doesn't hurt. It clarifies. If I had any lingering doubt, any small part of me that remembered the man I married, it is gone now. He is not a man. He is a parasite. I felt a strange wave of pity for Sienna. She was typing these messages, believing she was the heroine of a romance novel, unaware that the man she was defending was currently selling her future to the Russians. "Focus. Helena," Magnus commanded. "What is the schedule?" I scrolled through Julian's synced calendar, which I had accessed through Sienna's shared couples calendar app. "Tonight," I said, 7:30, the Louvre Museum. There is a charity gala for preservation of European heritage. It is black tie, very exclusive. That is the cover, Magnus nodded. The Volkov contact will be there. A public place, lots of noise, high security so no one can wear a wire easily. They will do the swap during the event. Julian has the drive, I said. I can see a file transfer log on his laptop from 2 hours ago. He moved the encrypted source code to an external device. Just then, the heavy oak door of the apartment opened. A man in a nondescript beige trench coat walked in. He looked like a weary accountant, but I knew he was the head of Magnus's private intelligence unit in Europe. "Mr. Sterling," the man said, nodding to Magnus, then to me. "We have a development." "Speak," Magnus said. "We tapped into the Air France reservation system," the man said, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "We flagged Julian Thorne's passport number as you requested." He laid the paper on the table. "He has a confirmed booking for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., flight 042 to Miami, with a connecting charter to Grand Cayman." "And Sienna?" I asked. The man shook his head. "Just one ticket, one way, first class." The silence in the room was deafening. "He is leaving her," I whispered. "He is going to do the deal tonight at the Louvre. Hand over the code, get the payment confirmed in the offshore account, and then get on a plane before the sun comes up. He is leaving Sienna here holding the bag." "She signed the incorporation papers," Magnus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying growl. "She is the legal owner of Parisian Ventures. When the transaction is flagged as a sanctions violation, the French authorities will arrest the owner. Julian will be sipping rum in the Caymans, while my daughter is being interrogated by Interpol." He planned this from day one, I realized. The ring, the proposal. It was all just to keep her quiet and happy until he could get on that plane. Magnus turned to the window, looking out at the Ritz. He is going to destroy my child to buy his freedom. No, I said, standing up. The heels of my stilettos clicked sharply on the parquet floor. He is not. Magnus turned back to me. The plan has changed. We cannot wait for him to transfer the money and track it. If he gets on that plane, he is gone. The Caymans have no extradition treaty for this kind of corporate espionage if he spins it right. We have to stop him before he leaves Paris. We have to stop him tonight, I said. At the Louvre, the intelligence officer asked nervously. Madame, that is a high-profile event. There will be ambassadors, celebrities. We cannot just drag him out. We don't need to drag him out, I said. My mind was racing, calculating the variables, constructing a new architecture for the evening. We need to corner him. We need to make him confess. And we need to do it in front of the only person whose opinion matters to him right now. Who? Magnus asked. The Russians. No, I said. Sienna. As long as Sienna trusts him, she is his shield. She will lie for him. She will claim she signed the papers willingly. She will destroy herself to save him because she thinks he loves her. I walked over to the garment bag that held the rest of the clothes Magnus had bought. We have to break the spell, I said. We have to show her exactly who he is, and we are going to do it on the biggest stage in Paris. I turned to Magnus. Do you have an invitation to this gala? I am Magnus Sterling, he said, buttoning his jacket. I own the company that sponsored the restoration of the wing we are standing in. I do not need an invitation. I am the host. Good, I said, because we are going to a party. I looked at the clock on the mantel. It was 4 p.m. I need access to the Louvre's audio-visual system. I told the hacker team, and I need a direct link to the projector in the main ballroom. What are you planning? Daughter? Magnus asked. I am planning a presentation, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Julian loves a big reveal. He loves to be the center of attention. I think it is time we gave him exactly what he wants. I picked up the tablet and looked at the photo of the ring one last time. He took his intern to Paris, I said softly. But he forgot to check the guest list. I walked into the bedroom to dress for war. The charcoal suit was for business. But for tonight. I needed something that looked like blood. The glass pyramid of the Louvre glowed like a diamond shard plunged into the heart of Paris. Inside, the Cour Marly was transformed into a cathedral of excess. The air smelled of white truffles, vintage champagne, and the specific, metallic scent of old money. A string quartet played Debussy in the corner, the music fighting a losing battle against the low hum of 500 of Europe's wealthiest people gossiping about tax havens and art acquisitions. I watched from the shadows of the arched entrance, unseen. My heart was not racing. It was beating with the slow, heavy rhythm of a war drum. Across the room, standing beneath a statue of a dying warrior, was Julian. He looked magnificent. I had to admit, he was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo with a velvet lapel, a glass of champagne held casually in one hand. He was holding court, his head thrown back in laughter, surrounded by a circle of banking executives. And clinging to his arm was Sienna. She was dressed for a coronation. Her gown was a frothy confection of white tulle and silver crystals that made her look like a princess from a storybook. It was beautiful, but it was too much. It screamed debutante in a room full of hardened matriarchs wearing sleek black silk. She was beaming, flashing the massive emerald-cut diamond on her finger to anyone who looked her way. And this, I heard Julian's voice drift over the crowd, smooth as oil, is Sienna Sterling, my new director of strategy. We are expanding the Parisian Ventures portfolio aggressively. Director of strategy. He was parading her. He was using her last name as a battering ram to open doors that had been closed to him a week ago. I adjusted the earpiece hidden in my right ear. Are we ready? I whispered. Audio is patched. The voice of Magnus's lead tech sounded in my ear. Video feed is synced. We are waiting on your signal, Madame. Wait for it, I said. I stepped out of the shadows. I was not wearing the gray business suit anymore. I was wearing red. It was a gown Magnus's stylist had pulled from a vault in Milan, a floor-length column of blood-red silk that fit like a second skin. It had long sleeves, a high neck, and a back that plunged dangerously low. It was not a dress for a wife. It was a dress for a siren. It was the color of a warning light. It was the color of a target. I walked into the room. The conversation nearest to me died instantly. Then the silence spread, rippling outward like a wave. Heads turned, glasses were lowered. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a wide aisle between me and my husband. I walked with my chin high. My eyes locked on Julian. He felt the shift in the room. He turned, a smile still plastered on his face, expecting to see a waiter or a new investor. When he saw me, the smile didn't just fade, it shattered. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like he might faint. He stood frozen, his champagne glass tilting dangerously in his hand. Sienna followed his gaze. Her eyes went wide. She looked from me to Julian, then back to me, confusion clouding her face. I stopped 2 feet away from them. The silence in the Cor Marley was absolute. Even the string quartet seemed to falter. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was low, but in the silence, it carried like a bell. "You forgot to invite me to the party." Julian swallowed hard. I saw his eyes dart to the exits, then to the security guards. He straightened his spine, trying to recover his composure, trying to put the mask back on. "Faith," he hissed, using my middle name, a habit he had when he was trying to diminish me. He stepped forward, blocking Sienna with his body, lowering his voice to a furious whisper. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you even get in?" "I walked in," I said calmly. The door was open. "You are making a scene," he whispered, his eyes manic. "You need to leave, now. I cut your cards. Faith, you have nothing. If you came here to beg, you are going to be very disappointed. I have security on speed dial." "I didn't come to beg." "Julian," I said. I reached out. He flinched, thinking I was going to slap him. Instead, I took hold of his bow tie. It was slightly crooked. "I came to fix your tie," I said, adjusting the silk knot with slow, deliberate movements. My fingers brushed against his neck. His skin was cold and damp with sweat. "You always were sloppy with the details. It is why you needed me." "Get your hands off me," he snarled under his breath. "You are finished. Look at you, trying to crash my night in that dress. You look desperate." "Do I?" I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "That is funny, because from where I am standing, you look like a man who is running out of time." I patted his chest, right over his racing heart. "Enjoy the champagne, Julian. It is the last expensive thing you will ever drink." I stepped back. Sienna moved then. She stepped out from behind Julian. Her face flushed with a mix of indignation and protective fury. She looked at me, trembling slightly in her tulle gown. "You need to leave him alone," she said, her voice shaking but loud enough for the circle of onlookers to hear. "Can't you have some dignity? It is over. Helena, he loves me. We are building a life together. Please, just go away and let us be happy." She sounded so sincere. She truly believed she was the heroine defending her prince from the wicked witch. I looked at her. I felt the white-hot anger in my chest cool into something heavy and sad. I saw myself 15 years ago. I saw the girl who believed Julian Thorne was the answer to every prayer. "Sienna," I said softly. "Don't talk to her," Julian snapped, grabbing Sienna's arm. "Don't listen to her, baby. She is crazy. She is off her meds." "I am not crazy, Sienna," I said, ignoring him. "And I am not here to fight you for him. You can have him, but before you take him, I want you to do one thing for me." "I am not doing anything for you," she spat. Check your purse, I said. Sienna frowned. What? Your purse, I repeated. The beaded clutch you are holding so tightly. Open it. Check for your passport. You are insane, Julian interrupted, his voice rising in panic. Sienna, don't listen to her. Let's go. We have a meeting. But the seed was planted. Doubt is a fast-growing weed. Sienna looked at Julian, seeing the sweat on his brow, the sheer terror in his eyes. Then she looked down at her bag. Why would I check my passport? She asked, her voice wavering. Because, I said. Julian has a flight booked for 6 o'clock tomorrow morning to the Cayman Islands. 1 ticket, 1 seat, first class, if he loves you. Sienna, why is he leaving the country without you? And why is your passport missing? That is a lie, Julian shouted. It was too loud. People were staring openly now. She is lying. I have the passports in the safe at the hotel. Check the bag. Sienna, I commanded. Sienna's hands were shaking as she unclasped the small bag. She dug through her lipstick, her compact, her phone. She felt around the bottom. She pulled the lining out. It was empty. She looked up, her face pale. It is not here. I put it in here this morning. I swear. She turned to Julian. Julian, where is my passport? I told you, Julian stammered, his charm evaporating into sweat. I put it in the safe, for safekeeping. You lose things, baby. You know you do. I didn't lose it, she whispered. The reality was crashing down on her. The texts I had hacked, the rushing, the vagueness about the return trip. He took it, Sienna, I said mercilessly. He took it so you couldn't follow him. He is going to leave you here to answer for the shell company you signed for. He is going to leave you to the police. Shut up. Julian lunged at me, his hand raised, but before he could touch me, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. A man had stepped out of the crowd. He was tall, with a thick neck and a face that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He wore a tuxedo that strained at the seams. He had a small scar under his left eye. I recognized him from the dossier, Nikolai Volkov, the middleman. Mr. Thorne, the man said. His accent was thick, heavy with Russian inflection. You are causing a scene. We have business to conclude. Julian froze. He looked at Nikolai, then at me, then at the room full of people watching him. He was trapped. Yes, Julian said, his voice trembling. Yes, of course. Just give me a moment. No moment, Nikolai said. Now, the item? He held out his hand. He didn't care about the wife. He didn't care about the mistress. He wanted the merchandise. Julian looked at Sienna. Specifically, he looked at her neck. Sienna was wearing a heavy silver pendant on a long chain. It was modern, industrial chic. Julian had given it to her yesterday. Give me the necklace, Sienna, Julian said. Sienna stepped back, clutching the pendant. Why you gave this to me? Sienna, give me the damn necklace, Julian snapped. The mask was gone completely now. He was snarling at her. The drive is in the pendant, I said clearly. That is the source code. Sienna. He hung the stolen goods around your neck so he wouldn't get caught carrying them through security. Sienna looked at the pendant in her hand. She looked at the Russian man waiting expectantly. She looked at Julian, the man she thought was her soulmate, looking at her with pure, unadulterated hatred because she was hesitating. You, she breathed, you used me. Give it to me. Julian lunged and ripped the necklace from her neck. The chain snapped with a sharp crack. He turned to Nikolai, holding the silver pendant out like an offering. Here, it is here. Take it. The transfer. I want the confirmation now. Nikolai took the pendant. He twisted the bottom. A small USB connector slid out. He nodded. He pulled out a phone and tapped a screen. Transfer initiated, Nikolai said. $5 million. Parisian Ventures. Julian let out a breath. A sound of pure relief. He smiled. He turned back to me, clutching the victory. You lose. Faith, he whispered. It is done. The money is moving. I win. I looked at him. I looked at the Russian holding the drive. I looked at the 500 witnesses surrounding us. No, Julian, I said. You don't? I raised my left hand and touched the diamond stud in my ear. Now, I said. The lights in the Louvre died. Total darkness swallowed the room. The crowd gasped. A few screams echoed off the high ceilings. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then, the massive projection screens that had been displaying high-resolution images of Renaissance paintings flickered to life. But they were not showing art. They were bright, blinding white, and across the center of every screen in the room, scrolling in real time, was code. What is that? Someone shouted. It looks like a bank transfer, another voice said. I watched Julian's face in the glow of the giant screens. He was staring up, his mouth open. On the screen, a transaction log appeared. Source Sterling Trust, Siena Destination Parisian Ventures, LLC. Authorization Siena Sterling Proxy Beneficiary, Julian Thorne. Then, a new line appeared. Transfer status, intercepted rerouting to U.S. Department of Justice. Evidence locker flagged, treason/sanctions violation. The room went deadly silent. The Russian man, Nikolai, looked at the screen. Then he looked down at the pendant in his hand. He looked at Julian. What is this? Nikolai asked. His voice was very quiet and very terrifying. I don't know, Julian stammered, backing away. It is a glitch. It is a hack. She did this. The screen changed again. This time, it showed a video. It was grainy, taken from a security camera. It showed Julian sitting in my office, typing on my computer. The timestamp was 3 months ago. The audio played over the massive speakers. I will frame her, Julian's voice boomed through the Louvre. I will plant the emails on her server. If the feds come, Faith takes the fall. She is the technical genius. It is believable. A collective gasp went through the room. I stood in the center of the chaos, the red dress glowing in the light of the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice rang out. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you are witnessing a crime in progress. Julian turned to run. He shoved Siena aside, sending her stumbling into a waiter. He scrambled toward the exit, but the doors opened before he could reach them, and standing there, silhouetted by the lights of the police cars flashing blue and red outside, was Magnus Sterling. He was not alone. Behind him were 6 officers from the French Brigade Financière and 2 men in suits who looked distinctly American. Magnus walked into the room. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the screens. He walked straight to where his daughter was sitting on the floor, weeping in her ruined tulle dress. He knelt down and put a hand on her shoulder. Then he stood up and looked at Julian. Mr. Thorne, Magnus said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. You are in my venue. You are wearing a tuxedo I paid for, and you just tried to sell a fake drive to a Russian agent in front of half of the European Union. Julian froze. Fake. You didn't think, I said, stepping up beside Magnus, that I would let you keep the real source code. Did you? I held up my hand. Between my fingers was a small silver flash drive. The brain is here, Julian, I said. All you sold them was a virus that is currently uploading the GPS location of every Volkov asset to the CIA. Julian looked at the Russian. Nikolai dropped the pendant as if it were burning hot. He looked at Julian with a promise of death in his eyes, then turned and vanished into the crowd. Though I knew the intelligence agents outside were waiting for him. Julian was alone. The exits were blocked. The money was gone. The girl was gone. It is over, I said, and for the first time in his life. Julian Thorne had nothing to say. The projection screens, which moments ago had displayed the Renaissance masterpieces of the Louvre, now glowed with a diagram that was far more modern and infinitely more brutal. It was a flowchart, stark white against a black background, mapping the artery of corruption Julian had built. The entire room stared at it. The graphic was simple enough for a child to understand, yet damning enough to bury a CEO. On the left, a circle labeled Sterling Family Trust. In the center, a jagged line connecting to a shell entity labeled Parisian Ventures. And on the right, the final destination, a private, numbered account in the Cayman Islands tagged Julian Thorne Personal Holdings. The silence in the core. Marley was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like a distant engine, but no one moved. The elite of Europe, holding their crystal flutes of champagne, looked from the screen to the man standing in the center of the room. Julian looked like an animal caught in the high beams of a semi-truck. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. Then, a feedback whine screeched through the audio system, sharp enough to make half the room flinch. The speakers crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice did not come from the floor. It came from above, 500 heads turned upward. On the VIP balcony, overlooking the sculpture garden like a Caesar surveying the Colosseum, stood Magnus Sterling. He was not flanked by police yet. He stood alone, his hands resting on the stone railing, looking down at the chaos with an expression of icy detachment. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening," Magnus said, his voice booming through the hall without a tremor. "We usually auction art at these events, but tonight I have a special addition to the catalog. The next item up for bid is the freedom of my former son-in-law." Julian looked up at the balcony, his eyes wide and wet. "Magnus," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Magnus, wait. I can explain. It is a misunderstanding. The accounts. They are just holding accounts." "Run," Julian whispered to Sienna, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her cry out. "Sienna, we have to run." He tried to drag her toward the east exit, the one leading to the Sully wing. He moved with the desperate, jerky energy of a man who knows the walls are closing in. But before he could take 3 steps, the heavy oak doors slammed shut. 4 men in dark tactical gear stood in front of them, arms crossed. They were not hotel security, they were private contractors, and they looked immovable. Julian spun around, dragging Sienna toward the main entrance under the glass pyramid. Blocked. More guards. He was a rat in a very expensive maze. "Let me go," Sienna screamed, trying to twist her wrist out of his grip. The tulle of her dress ripped with a sound like tearing paper. "Julian, you are hurting me." "Shut up," Julian hissed, pulling her harder. "You signed the papers. You stupid girl. If I go down, you go down. We are leaving." Magnus, still watching from the balcony, made a hand signal. The spotlight that had been focused on the stage swung around. It hit me. The beam of light caught the red silk of my dress, turning me into a pillar of fire in the center of the room. Magnus turned from the railing and walked toward the stairs. The crowd parted for him as he descended, a slow, rhythmic march that echoed on the marble floor. He walked past the Russian oligarchs, past the French ministers, past his own weeping daughter, and came to stand directly beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, claiming weight. "For months," Magnus said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume that was somehow more terrifying than his shout. "My advisors told me I needed a successor. They told me my children were unsuited for the brutality of this world." He looked at Sienna, who was trembling in Julian's grip, her mascara running down her face in black rivers. His look was not angry, it was disappointed. It was the look a man gives a bad investment before he cuts his losses. "I have a daughter by blood," Magnus announced to the room. "Sienna. She has my name, she has my eyes, but she lacks the one thing required to sit at my table. She lacks the spine." Sienna let out a sob, her knees buckling. Julian hauled her up roughly. "And then," Magnus continued, turning his gaze to me, "there is Helena." He looked at me with a pride that felt genuine, fierce, and entirely dangerous. "Helena Briarwood is not of my blood. She is from Detroit, She built her empire from nothing while my daughter was shopping for handbags. But tonight, she is the one standing in the fire. She is the one who defended my legacy when my own flesh and blood tried to sign it away. Magnus raised his voice, addressing the entire room. I formally declare Helena Briarwood as my partner, my proxy, and my spiritual heir. She is the daughter I should have had, and anyone who wishes to do business with Sterling Industries will now answer to her. Julian stared at us. The envy on his face was so potent it looked painful. He had spent 10 years trying to get Magnus to look at him with a fraction of that respect. He had married me to get ahead, then discarded me to get to Magnus's money, only to find that I had taken the throne he coveted. "She is a fraud!" Julian screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is a hacker. She manipulated the screens. Nikolai, tell them we made a deal." Julian turned desperately to the Russian man, Nikolai Volkov, who was standing near the statue of a Greek boxer. Nikolai had not moved. He was holding the silver pendant drive in his hand, staring at it with a look of growing suspicion. "The deal is done," Julian pleaded, sweating profusely. "You have the code. I sent the transfer. Tell them. Nikolai, tell them I delivered." I took a step forward. The red dress swished around my ankles like liquid. "He delivered nothing." "Nikolai," I said calmly. Nikolai looked up at me. His eyes were flat, dead shark eyes. "I have the drive," he said, holding it up. My technician verified the file size. "It is the correct terabytes." "It is the correct size," I agreed. I made sure of that. I filled it with junk data to mimic the weight of the Aetherus source code. But if you plug that drive into your servers in Moscow, if you try to execute that code— I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was thin and tight as a wire. "I replaced the logistics algorithm with a polymorphic wiper virus," I said. "I wrote it myself 2 days ago. It is designed to look like the AI, but the moment it shakes hands with your network, it does not optimize your supply chains. It eats them. It will overwrite every hard drive, every backup, and every server connected to your mainframe with zeros. It will brick your entire operation in less than 10 minutes. Nikolai's hand closed over the pendant. His face went purple. He realized instantly that he had almost walked a Trojan horse into the heart of his organization. "You," Nikolai whispered, looking at Julian. "You tried to destroy us." "No," Julian shrieked. "No. She is lying. I stole the real code, I swear. She switched it. I didn't know." "It doesn't matter what you knew. Julian," I said. "You sold them a bomb, and you took their $5 million. The dynamic in the room shifted violently. The French police were at the doors, representing the law, but inside the room, staring at Julian, was the Russian mafia, representing a much older, much bloodier form of justice. Nikolai took a step toward Julian. He did not look like a businessman anymore. He looked like an executioner. "My money," Nikolai said softly, "and my time. You have wasted both." Julian backed away, dragging Sienna with him. He was trapped between the police who would arrest him and the Russians who would kill him. He looked for a shield. He looked for a scapegoat. He looked at Sienna. "It wasn't me," Julian babbled, his voice high and hysterical. He shook Sienna like a rag doll. Tell them. Sienna, you signed the papers. You opened the accounts. It is your name on the LLC." Sienna stared at him, the man she had defended to her friends, the man she had bought a 4-carat ring for, the man she had defied her father to love. "Tell them," Julian screamed, shoving her forward toward the police and the Russians. "She is the owner. Parisian. Ventures is hers. I am just an employee. She masterminded the whole thing. I was just following orders." He was offering her up. He was throwing her to the wolves to buy himself 5 seconds of breathing room. The room gasped. It was a sound of pure disgust. Even the hardened socialites looked away from the spectacle of a man hiding behind a terrified 21-year-old girl. Sienna stood there, stumbling in her torn dress. She looked at Julian, the fog of infatuation, The fairy tale narrative, the us against the world fantasy, it all evaporated in the heat of his cowardice. She looked at me. I was standing tall in my red armor, untouched. Then she looked at her father, who was watching her with crossed arms, waiting to see if she would finally stand up. Something in Sienna broke, and then something hardened. She reached up to her neck. She wasn't wearing the pendant anymore, Julian had ripped it off, but she was wearing a diamond necklace he had given her as a token of forever yesterday. "You coward," she whispered. "Tell them," Julian yelled again. "You pathetic, lying coward," Sienna screamed. She ripped the diamond necklace from her throat. The clasp broke, scratching her skin, drawing a thin line of blood. She balled the diamonds in her fist and threw them. They hit Julian in the face. The metal struck his cheekbone with a sharp crack, cutting him. "I signed because I trusted you," Sienna shrieked, her voice raw and ugly and real. "I stole from my father because I loved you, and you are just using me as a meat shield." She turned to the police officers who had finally pushed past the security and were entering the circle. "Officer," Sienna yelled, pointing a shaking hand at Julian. "He did it. I have the texts, I have the emails. He told me what to sign. He has the passwords. Arrest him. Get him away from me." Julian's face crumbled. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, for a lawyer, for anyone. He saw only contempt. He saw Magnus Sterling looking at him like he was a stain on the carpet. He saw the Russians looking at him like a target. And he saw me. I met his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched him dissolve. "Sienna, baby, don't," Julian whimpered, trying to reach for her hand again. "We can fix this. I love you." Sienna spit in his face. It was not a ladylike gesture. It was gross. It was primitive. And it was the most dignified thing she had ever done. "Don't you ever," she hissed. "Say that word again." The French police officers moved in. Two of them grabbed Julian by the arms. He didn't fight. He went limp, his legs dragging on the marble floor as they hauled him away from the girl he had destroyed. Nikolai watched him go, then turned to me. He nodded, a small, barely perceptible gesture of respect for the trap I had laid. And then he turned and melted into the crowd, vanishing before the police could question him. I stood alone in the center of the room with Magnus. The red dress felt heavy now. The arrival of the Brigade Financière was not dramatic in the way movies are dramatic. There were no sirens inside the hall, no guns drawn, no shouting of commands. It was bureaucratic, heavy, and absolute. It was the crushing weight of the state descending upon a man who thought he was above gravity. 6 officers in dark uniforms moved through the parted crowd. They did not run. They walked with the terrifying inevitability of a glacier. Leading them was a commissaire with a face like a crumpled legal document. He stopped in front of Julian, who was still on his knees where the Russians had left him, clutching the hem of Sienna's ruined dress. "Monsieur Julian Thorne," the commissaire said. His voice was bored. He had seen 1,000 men like Julian. "I am placing you under arrest for aggravated fraud, money laundering, and violation of the French Monetary and Financial Code. We also have a provisional warrant from Interpol regarding violations of the United States Export Control Reform Act." 2 officers hauled Julian to his feet. The metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound was small, sharp, and final. It echoed off the marble statues of the Greek gods who looked down on him with stone indifference. "No!" Julian shouted, the reality finally piercing his delusion. He thrashed, his tuxedo jacket tearing at the shoulder. "You are making a mistake. I am the CEO of Aetheris Global. I have diplomatic contacts." "This is a frame-up." He spun around, his eyes wild, searching for a lifeline. "They landed on me." "Her!" Julian screamed, straining against the grip of the officers. He pointed a handcuffed finger at me. "She did this, Helena Briarwood. She is the hacker. She is the one who moved the money. I am just the face. She runs the systems. Arrest her." The crowd murmured. Julian was desperate, but he was also loud. He was planting seeds of doubt. Could the wife be the mastermind? Was he just a puppet? The commissaire looked at me. Madame. I did not flinch. I did not shout back. I simply reached into the small clutch bag I carried, not a weapon, but a vault of evidence, and pulled out my secure phone. I unlocked it and held the screen up for the commissaire. Officer, I said, my voice cool and projected clearly so the press at the perimeter could hear. My husband claims I manipulated the company systems to commit this crime. However, I have here a digital log from the Etherius Human Resources mainframe. I swiped the screen. On November 21st, at 11:45 in the evening, I stated, my administrative access was revoked, my biometric profile was scrubbed, my clearance was terminated, the order was signed digitally by the CEO, Julian Thorne. I swiped again. The illegal transfers to the Cayman Islands began 3 days after I was locked out of the building. The source code was copied onto that external drive 48 hours after my laptop was remotely wiped by his command. I stepped closer to Julian. He flinched away from me. You were very thorough, Julian, I said softly. You wanted to make sure I couldn't stop you. You wanted total control. You locked every door, changed every password, and burned every bridge so you could be the sole king of your castle. I smiled. It was a razor-thin expression. You locked me out of the crime scene before the crime was committed. You gave me the perfect alibi. You cannot blame the arsonist when you are the one holding the matches and standing inside the locked house. The commissaire looked at the logs. He looked at Julian. The timeline is consistent, the officer said. He turned back to his men. Take him. Wait, Julian sobbed. He was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs that ruined his makeup. Sienna, tell them you signed the papers. You are the owner. Tell them I was just advising you. He was trying to drag her down with him one last time. Magnus Sterling stepped forward. He moved like a tank. He placed his large body between Julian and his daughter. He looked at the commissaire. My daughter, Magnus rumbled, his voice low and dangerous, is a victim of coercive control and fraud. She was used as a proxy by a man twice her age. Magnus looked down at Sienna. She was shivering, her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the floor. However, Magnus continued, she did sign the documents. She is legally exposed. He turned to the commissaire. I have spoken with the prosecutor. My daughter will waive her right to silence. She will provide a full, unrestricted testimony against Julian Thorne. She will hand over every text, every email, every recording. She will testify to the coercion. In exchange, she is to be treated as a cooperating witness, not a co-conspirator. The commissaire nodded slowly. If she cooperates fully, the magistrate will be lenient, but she must come with us now. Magnus turned to Sienna. Did you hear that? Sienna looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen, and full of a terrible, newfound maturity. She looked at Julian. The man she had thought was her prince. She saw a sweating, crying coward who was trying to send her to prison to save his own skin. I hear you, father, she whispered. She stepped toward the police. I will tell you everything, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I will tell you how he made me steal the seal. I will tell you how he made me open the accounts. I will tell you everything. No, Julian shrieked. You stupid little... Get him out of here, the commissaire ordered. The officers began to drag Julian toward the exit. The press photographers surged forward, a wall of flashing lights blinding him. This was his worst nightmare. He wasn't leaving as a titan of industry. He was leaving as a common criminal, documented in high definition for the morning papers. Stop, I said. The word was not loud, but it had the weight of command. The officers hesitated. They looked at Magnus. Magnus nodded. I walked over to Julian. He was trembling. His sweat smelled of fear and expensive cologne that had turned sour. He looked up at me, his eyes full of hate and confusion. You won, he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. You ruined me. Are you happy? Faith, you get the house. You get the money. Is that it? I stood 2 inches from his face. I could see the pores in his skin. I could see the dilated pupils. I don't want the house, Julian, I said. And I don't want the money. I want the work. I pulled out my phone again. I opened the Ethos corporate governance app. I had accessed it through the back door I opened in the safe house. Do you know what Article 19, Section 4 of the Ethos shareholder agreement says? I asked him. He stared at me blankly. Of course he didn't. He never read the contracts. It is the bad lever clause, I explained, my tone helpful, like a teacher correcting a slow student. I wrote it myself 5 years ago. It states that if a founding partner is charged with a felony involving moral turpitude or corporate malfeasance, their unvested equity is forfeited immediately. Julian's face went gray. You can't. And, I continued, their vested equity, the shares you actually own, the 51% controlling stake you stole from me is subject to a compulsory buyback by the remaining founding partner. I tapped the screen. A confirmation box appeared. Initiate compulsory buyback. J. Thorne. Cause felony indictment / fraud. Price per share par value 0.0001. The price is set at par value, I whispered. That is 1/100th of a cent per share. No, Julian gasped. No, you can't do that. That is my company. I am Ethos. Not anymore, I said. I turned the screen so he could see it. My thumb hovered over the green button. You stole my ideas for 10 years. Julian, you stood on my shoulders and called yourself a giant. You took the credit, the fame, and the money. You thought you could erase me. I leaned in close. I am taking it back. All of it. Principal and interest. I pressed the button. Transaction complete. Transferring 5 million shares to H. Briarwood. Total cost, $500. My phone pinged. A receipt. I just bought your entire empire for $500, I said. I put it on your Amex. I hope you don't mind. Julian made a sound that was not human. It was the sound of a soul snapping in half. He slumped in the officer's arms, his legs giving out completely. He was not just arrested. He was destitute. He was erased. Get him out of my sight, I said. The officers dragged him away. This time, he didn't scream. He hung limp, a broken marionette whose strings had been cut. The flashbulbs popped like gunfire as he was hauled through the glass doors and into the back of a police van. The room was silent. I stood there, breathing in the cool air of the museum. I felt light. The weight of the last 3 days, the weight of the last 10 years, was gone. Magnus walked over to me. He stood beside me, watching the police lights fade into the Paris night. That was ruthless, he said. It was necessary, I replied. He will never recover, Magnus said. Even if he gets out of prison in 20 years, he is blacklisted. He is bankrupt. You didn't just beat him, you dismantled him. He tried to sell my mind to the Russians, I said. He got off easy. Magnus chuckled. It was a deep, rumbling sound. He turned to face me, ignoring the staring crowd of socialites who were terrified to approach us. You know, Magnus said, when I called you in that diner, I thought I was hiring a consultant. I thought I was hiring a scorned wife who could give me a password. He shook his head. I was wrong. I was hiring a successor. He extended his hand. The board of Sterling Industries meets next Tuesday in New York. I am removing the current CEO. He is soft. He hesitates. I looked at his hand. And I want you to take the chair. Magnus said, not as a favor, not as a reward, but because I need someone who can cut the throat of a problem without blinking. He paused, his eyes serious. You called me Magnus earlier, but I meant what I said on that balcony. You are the daughter of my spirit. You are the only one who understands the cost of the crown. Daughter, he repeated, testing the word. It didn't sound like ownership this time. It sounded like a promotion. It sounded like the highest rank in the army. I took his hand. His grip was iron, but mine was steel. I accept the chair, Magnus, I said. But Ethos remains mine. I am merging it. We are going to rebuild the logistics network, but we are doing it my way. No shortcuts, no fraud, just pure, brutal efficiency. Agreed, Magnus said. Now, let's go. I have a jet waiting, and I believe we have a board meeting to prepare for. We walked out of the Louvre together. We did not look back at the ruined party. We did not look back at the weeping Sienna being led to a separate car. We walked straight into the flashing lights. Two predators stepping out of the jungle, ready to eat the world. As I stepped into the cool night air, I pulled the diamond stud from my ear, the one I had used to signal the blackout, and tossed it into the gutter. Faith Bryant, the victim from Ohio, was dead. She died in a diner on 10th Avenue. Helena Briarwood, the CEO, was just getting started. 3 months is a strange amount of time. It is long enough for the seasons to change from the biting frost of winter to the tentative, muddy warmth of early spring. It is long enough for a scandal to burn through the news cycle and turn into ash. And it is long enough to bulldoze a life and pour a new foundation. I sat in my new office. It was not in a glass tower in Tribeca. It was not a penthouse suite with Italian marble floors and views of the Empire State Building. It was a converted warehouse space in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. The walls were exposed brick, painted white. The floors were polished concrete. Through the large industrial windows, I could see the East River and the tugboats churning the gray water. The sign on the frosted glass door did not say Aetheris Global. It said, simply, Briarwood Logistics. I took a sip of coffee from a ceramic mug that said Detroit on the side. It was cheap coffee, the kind I used to drink with my mother, and it tasted better than any $19 latte Julian had ever ordered for me. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who wore combat boots and had a degree in data science, knocked on the doorframe. The final transfer from the Sterling acquisition just cleared, she said, holding out a tablet. $75 million. Deposited into the operating account. We are fully funded for the Rural Medicine Pilot Program. Thank you, Sarah, I said. Send the confirmation to the board, and tell the engineering team I want the drone prototypes ready for flight testing by Friday. You got it, boss. She left, and I looked at the number on the screen. $75 million. It was the price of my past. After the night at the Louvre, the dismantling of Aetheris had been swift and surgical. I had exercised the bad lever clause, seizing Julian's equity. Then, instead of trying to rehabilitate a brand that was now synonymous with treason and fraud, I stripped it for parts. I sold the commercial shipping contracts, the client lists, and the luxury office leases to Magnus Sterling. He absorbed the profitable parts of the company into his empire. In exchange, he gave me capital, enough capital to build what I had always wanted to build. Before Julian convinced me that the only point of technology was to make rich people richer, Briarwood Logistics was not designed to help fashion brands ship handbags faster. It was designed to optimize supply chains for rural hospitals and disaster zones. We were building autonomous drone networks to deliver blood, insulin, and emergency antibiotics to places that FedEx didn't go. It was the work I should have been doing when my mother was dying of a treatable condition because the nearest specialist was 3 hours away in a snowstorm. I swiveled my chair to look at the river. Julian would hate this office. He would say it lacked prestige. He would say it looked blue-collar. But Julian was not in a position to critique interior design anymore. My former husband was currently residing in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, awaiting transfer to a federal penitentiary. The plea deal his expensive lawyers had tried to negotiate had fallen apart the moment the Department of Justice confirmed the contents of the flash drive I handed to the Russians. Attempted espionage is not a charge you can talk your way out of. The trial was scheduled for next month, but the outcome was a mathematical certainty. The evidence was overwhelming. The forensic audit of the Cayman accounts, the testimony of the Russian middleman who had turned state's witness to avoid assassination, and the digital logs I provided. It was an iron cage. He was looking at 20 years, minimum. I heard through the grapevine that he spent his days writing letters. He wrote to senators he used to donate to. He wrote to business partners who had blocked his number. He even wrote to me. I had a stack of envelopes in my drawer, all stamped with the prison censor's mark. I had never opened a single one. And Sienna. I picked up a file from my desk. It was a status report from Magnus. He had been true to his word. He did not let Sienna go to prison, but he did not let her go back to the Plaza Athénée either. He had hired a team of lawyers to negotiate her immunity in exchange for her testimony. But the moment she walked out of the French courthouse, he had stripped her of everything else. Her trust fund was frozen. Her credit cards were canceled. Her car was repossessed. Magnus had shipped her to a Sterling Industries aluminum smelting plant in North Dakota. She was not there as an executive. She was there as an administrative assistant in the inventory department. She lived in a company dormitory. She earned $18 an hour. She had to clock in at 6 in the morning. The report said she had cried for the first 2 weeks. She had threatened to sue. She had tried to run away, but then, around week 4, something changed. She stopped calling her friends in New York. She started asking questions about the smelting process. Last week, she had caught a billing error that saved the plant $4,000. Magnus had sent me a text when he heard about it. She is learning the value of $1. She might be a human being yet. I closed the file. I did not hate Sienna. I pitied the girl she was, and I held out a tentative hope for the woman she might become. She was serving her time, just like Julian. The difference was, her prison had a door she could unlock if she worked hard enough. His did not. A courier arrived at reception at 2 in the afternoon. He carried a thick envelope with the logo of a white shoe law firm. "Sign here, please," he said, holding out a digital pad. I signed. I took the envelope to my desk and slid it open with a letter opener. It was the final decree. Thorn versus Briarwood. The divorce papers. They were heavy, printed on bonded cotton paper. I flipped to the last page. Julian's signature was there. It was shaky. Smaller than the flamboyant autograph he used to scrawl on expense reports, it looked like the signature of a defeated man. I picked up my pen. It was a heavy fountain pen Magnus had given me as a closing gift for the Etherius sale. I did not hesitate. I did not cry. I did not feel a pang of nostalgia for the wedding in Colorado or the nights in our first apartment. Those memories belonged to a different person. They belonged to Faith, the girl who needed to be saved. I signed my name, Helena Briarwood. I dated it. I placed the pen down. It was done. I was legally, financially, and spiritually severed from the parasite who had fed on my brilliance for a decade. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Magnus. "I assume the Eagle has landed," his voice rumbled. "The papers are signed," I said. "I am sending them back to the court within the hour." "Good," Magnus said. "Now we can focus on something that actually matters. I reviewed the specs for your drone navigation system. The redundancy protocol is impressive, but I think you are underestimating the battery thermal load in sub-zero climates." I smiled. "I tested it in a wind tunnel at -20 degrees yesterday. Magnus, the thermal load is within nominal parameters. You are just worried I'm going to outperform your own logistics division." "I am counting on it," he said. "If you do not outperform me, I made a bad investment." Speaking of investments, the board of Sterling Industries is pressuring me to name a new vice chairman. They seem to think I'm getting too old to scare the competition by myself. "I am busy, Magnus," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I have a company to run. I can't be your vice chairman." "You can be a non-executive director," he countered. 2 meetings a quarter, and you get to tell a room full of old men that they are wrong. You know you enjoy that." I laughed. "I will think about it." "Dinner tonight," he said. "The grill, 8 o'clock. I want to discuss the North Dakota supply lines. And Ma, I want to celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "Freedom," he said. "And the acquisition of wisdom. It is a rare commodity." "I will be there," I said. "But I am paying. You bought the last 3 times." "We will see who grabs the check faster," he said, and hung up. It was not a father-daughter relationship. It was not a romance. It was an alliance. We were 2 wolves who ran the same forest, respecting each other's territory but hunting together when the winter got hard. I packed up my bag at 6. I walked out of the Navy Yard and hailed a cab to Manhattan. I asked the driver to drop me off in Tribeca. A few blocks from the grill, the air was crisp, smelling of rain and asphalt. I wanted to walk. I walked down Greenwich Street. The neighborhood had not changed. Even though my entire world had inverted, the expensive strollers were still pushed by nannies. The restaurant still charged $30 for pasta. I stopped in front of a small bodega. It was the same bodega where I had stood 3 months ago, shivering in the rain, with a declined credit card and a packet of instant noodles I couldn't afford. The neon sign flickered, open 24 hours. I stared at the glass door. I remembered the shame. I remembered the feeling of being small, of being erased, of being nothing more than a wallet that had been emptied. I could go in there. I could walk in, buy the entire inventory of the store, and leave a $1,000 tip for the cashier who had looked at me with boredom. I could flex the black titanium card sitting in my pocket, the one with a limit that could buy a small island. I stood there for a long minute, watching the customers go in and out. Then, I smiled. I didn't need to go in. I didn't need to prove anything to the cashier, or to the ghost of Julian, or even to myself. Buying the store wouldn't fix the past. Building the future was the only thing that mattered. I turned away from the bodega and started walking toward the restaurant. My heels clicked on the pavement, a steady, rhythmic sound. They tell you that revenge is a dish best served cold. They are wrong. Revenge is not a dish you serve to others. Revenge is a fuel. You burn it to keep yourself warm while you build a castle so high that the people who hurt you look like ants when you look down. I was not angry anymore. I was not sad. I was busy. I checked my watch. 7:55. Magnus hated lateness. I picked up my pace, the cool wind brushing against my face. I passed a reflective glass window and caught a glimpse of myself. The red dress was gone, replaced by a sharp cream trench coat and a look of absolute, unshakable purpose. My name is Helena Briarwood. I am 34 years old. I am the CEO of Briarwood Logistics, and for the first time in my life, the keys are in my pocket. The tank is full, and I am the only one deciding where this ride goes next. I crossed the street and walked into the warmth of the restaurant, ready to order the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, not because I wanted to show off, but because I had earned every single drop. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a wild journey from that freezing night in the bodega to this new office in Brooklyn, and I am so grateful you stuck with me through every twist and turn. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. Are you tuning in from your office, your car, or maybe while you are cooking dinner? I would love to connect and hear your thoughts on Julian's fate. Did he get what he deserved? Be sure to subscribe to Crimson Drama Stories for more tales of justice and betrayal. Like this video and give it a huge boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story. Until next time, remember, never let anyone else hold your keys.